Have you gone in and tried to select a grunt tube or gone online and tried to figure out which one to get? It's a little confusing. You're not alone. In this video, we're gonna break them down for you. Coming up. Hey everybody, Michael Batiste from the Elk Calling Academy, where we give you your blueprint for success in the elk woods. On this channel, we do elk call reviews, gear reviews, elk calling lessons, tips, and tutorials just like this one. So if you're new to our channel, please consider subscribing. All right, so in the first couple of chapters of the Beginner's Guide to Elk Calling, we helped you select a reed, showed you where to position it in the roof of your mouth, got you going on some drills, and even bugling. Now it's time to add a grunt tube. What's the purpose of a grunt tube? What does it do? So basically a grunt tube is almost like a megaphone. It amplifies your bugle, which allows you to cover more ground, reach out farther, but it also gives depth onto the bottom end of your bugles, which gives realism. So it allows you to mimic that bull even closer than you can with just your voice. Now, we've all been there where we have forgotten our grunt tube or left it and have had to grab a water bottle or something to make a grunt tube out of, which works in a pinch. But with all the grunt tubes on the market today, which one's really the best for you? Do you stay with just a straight hose style, or do you get into the big old wiffle ball bat style? Well, believe it or not, each one does serve its own purposes and has its own advantages and disadvantages. As you go larger in the grunt tube, meaning the bigger the barrel, the roundness of them, it allows your sound to expand in the tube a little more and gives depth on the bottom end and more volume. Now, that's not to say out of the straight tube that you couldn't get the volume that's needed. It's just not going to have as much as those bigger tubes. So really the question you need to ask yourself is, what type of caller are you going to be? Are you going to be an aggressive caller or a passive caller? Aggressive meaning, are you going to be that challenge? You want to challenge every bull that you come up against. You want to elicit that fire instinct to fight. If so, then you want to go with a larger style. For example, the Rump Shaker from Wapiti River Outdoors, or the Unleashed from Phelps Game Calls, the Extreme Bully Bull from Bugling Bull Game Calls. Those are all examples of tubes that will allow you to have that aggressive approach. Now, if you're going to be passive to where, you don't necessarily want to sound like the biggest bull on the mountain, but you still want good tones, then you kind of want to go the middle of the road. Options there are the Dominator from Flex Game Calls, the Golden Tone grunt tube from Barry Game Calls, the Chuckler from Elk Nut, also the tube from Mile High Note Game Calls. That one's kind of in the middle there. So now you have even more options now that once you get into those tubes and you've decided on what size you want. Now your options are, do you go with a small mouthpiece or do you go with a flared mouthpiece? There are differences, and this is kind of, again, personal preference and personal comfort. The small tube is designed to just go right in front of the lips. So where the flared end, your lips can actually fit inside. Now, if you go with the flared option, now you have options in different size flares. So some companies do make a little larger flare and out of different materials too. So it's just personal preference and comfort. If you have some friends with grunt tubes, kind of bugle on theirs a little bit and see what fits you the best and what's most comfortable to you. Now, the other thing about grunt tubes and choosing your style, it also comes into where are you going to be hunting. If you're hunting in areas that have kind of open terrain where you really want to reach out long distances, then the larger grunt tubes are going to benefit you more because they give you a little bit more volume and can reach out farther. If you're hunting in really heavy timber, that heavy timber knocks the sounds down. It doesn't travel as far, so the big tubes may not be a benefit there. The other thing to consider is, are you hunting from a base camp in a vehicle and just doing day hikes, or are you putting camp and everything on your back and backpacking in 10 miles? If you're backpacking in, weight really is an issue for everything that you have, because your intent of going back there is to come out heavy, loaded down with meat. So even a few ounces can make a difference. On the light end, the Golden Tone Grunt Tube from Barry Game Calls is great because that kind of gives you a combination of good sounds, lightweight, and kind of hits all those check marks. It does have the smaller end for the mouthpiece on it, but you can always modify a tube. So that's the other thing. If you're looking for tubes and you can't just find a tube that has all the pieces of the puzzle that you want, you can get more than one tube and kind of Frankenstein them together to make your own style. This is an example here where we took two different tubes and married them together because we wanted to get the expansion capabilities of the wiffle ball bat shape, but we wanted a flexible end so when it's over our shoulder, you know, we still have that ability to call on it and point that sound in a different direction. So you certainly can Frankenstein grab some different parts and pieces together. Same thing with a tube with a small end. If you really like the way it sounds, but because of that small end, there are things that you can do to modify that to turn it into a wider flared end. You know, the size of the tube, I've heard a lot of people at sport shows throughout the years when they see those big tubes, they're really adamant about, oh, I would never pack anything that big. But honestly, you know, this style of tube, when it's over your shoulder, it's actually riding vertical right next to your pack. You don't even know it's there. So the benefits of the larger tubes, in my personal opinion, outweigh the smaller tubes. But I wouldn't steer away from the smaller tubes because you can still get really good sound out of those. So personal preference, which route am I going to steer you towards? I would say the middle of the road to the larger tubes is a good place to go. So your Barry Game Calls, your Rocky Mountain Hunting Calls and Supplies, your Wapiti River, your Mile High Note Game Call, your Phelps Game Calls, the Unleashed, all those tubes are in that middle to large. There really is an advantage because even though you have the mindset of I want to be passive, you're going to get into a situation one day where you lock horns with a large herd bull. On the smaller tube, you're not going to be able to sound aggressive enough to really intimidate that bull or get him past the point of where he just has to come in to face you. With the larger tubes, you have that ability. The other nice thing about those tubes that are in the medium to larger range, you can back off your calling by your air pressure and how you finish to sound like a smaller bull anyway. So there really is a lot more versatility on that way. As far as the mouthpiece goes, I really like a flared mouthpiece. For me, that is the most comfortable, but again, it's personal preference on what you want. So that's really grunt tubes in a nutshell. It all boils down to personal preference and what feels comfortable to you, because confidence in your calling is the key to being successful in calling out in the woods. If you're comfortable, you trust your gear, you believe in your gear, you're going to have a much better time calling out there. If this is the first time that you've caught one of our Beginner's Guide to Elk Calling, not to worry. Towards the end of the video, we'll actually put right up here in this corner a link that you can click on and go to the other chapters in the Beginner's Guide to Elk Calling to get up to speed on what we've covered already. Also, down in this bottom corner, we're gonna put a link down to our Wapiti Wednesday Q&A where we actually answer questions from you guys that you've sent in to us on some different sounds and how to make different sounds. Now, as I mentioned, if you are new to the channel, you can actually click right here and go over to our subscribe page and then never miss out when we upload a video. As always, guys, we appreciate your support. Thank you for tuning in to the Beginner's Guide to Elk Calling, brought to you by Elk Calling Academy, where we give you your blueprint for success in the elk woods. We'll catch you guys on the next chapter. Good luck and keep calling.